"Women don't belong on a sniper range," the drill instructor announced loudly, staring directly at the small figure adjusting her rifle. The male recruit snickered, watching the 5 feet 4 inches woman who looked like she belonged in a college library, not behind a Barrett M82. What none of them knew was that she wasn't a recruit. She was Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun, and she was there to teach the class. With 89 confirmed kills and 3 silver stars that proved women belonged exactly where she stood. For more powerful stories about our military heroes, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. The morning sun beat down on Range 7 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, casting long shadows across the shooting positions. The air smelled of gun oil, brass, and a particular kind of testosterone that came from 30 male soldiers who believed they were about to become the elite of the elite. Sniper School, the hardest training the U.S. Army had to offer, a program where 80% washed out in the first 2 weeks. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb stood at the front of the range, his voice carrying across the firing line with the authority of someone who had graduated top of his class 15 years ago. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of presence that made young soldiers stand straighter without being told. His chest displayed rows of ribbons that told stories of deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and places that didn't officially exist on any map. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice sharp as a blade, "welcome to the United States Army Sniper School. You are here because someone thought you had potential. My job is to prove them wrong, or make you earn the right to wear the crossed rifles on your sleeve." The recruits stood in formation, their faces a mixture of determination and barely concealed arrogance. These weren't average soldiers. They were the best marksmen from their units, handpicked for their shooting skills and psychological profiles. Each one believed he was destined to join the ranks of legendary snipers like Carlos Hathcock and Chris Kyle. That's when she walked onto the range. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun was 32 years old, stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, and weighed 110 pounds. Her jet black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her face had the kind of delicate bone structure that made people think of porcelain dolls, not precision-killing machines. She wore standard Army combat uniforms with no indication of rank or qualification visible at first glance. She carried a rifle case in one hand and a range bag in the other, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of someone completely comfortable with their equipment. But to the 30 recruits watching her approach, she looked completely out of place, like someone had wandered onto the wrong training area. Private First Class Jake Morrison was the first to laugh. At 23, he was a college dropout who had found his calling in the infantry. He'd won every marksmanship competition in his battalion and carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never failed at anything physical in his life. "Yo, did someone order a secretary?" he muttered to the soldier beside him, loud enough to be heard by half the formation. The laughter rippled through the ranks. Nervous at first, then bolder as Sergeant Webb didn't immediately shut it down. The instructor himself was staring at Sarah with barely concealed irritation, clearly annoyed by the interruption to his opening speech. Specialist David Torres, standing in the second row, shook his head with a smirk. "Maybe she's lost. Someone should help her find the admin building before she gets hurt out here." More laughter. Sarah continued walking, seemingly oblivious to the commentary. She found an empty shooting position at the far right of the line and began unpacking her equipment with methodical precision. First came the rifle, a custom M110 semi-automatic sniper system that looked like it had seen serious use. The stock was worn smooth from countless hours of handling, and the scope bore the tiny scratches that came from deployment in harsh environments. Sergeant Webb's jaw tightened. He strode across the range towards Sarah, his boots crunching on the gravel. The recruits watched with barely concealed glee, expecting to witness this woman getting kicked off their range, put back in whatever administrative role she'd wandered away from. "Excuse me." Webb's voice carried across the suddenly silent range. "This is a closed training evolution. Sniper school recruits only. You need to clear this area immediately." Sarah looked up from her rifle case, meeting his eyes with a gaze that was calm, steady, and completely unbothered by his authority. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried perfectly in the morning air. "Staff Sergeant Chun, reporting as requested, Sergeant Webb." Webb's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like panic. His hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Orders. He read them once. Then again, his face going through several shades of red before settling on a pale gray. "Chun," he repeated, his voice suddenly lacking its earlier confidence. "Sarah Chun." "That's correct, Sergeant." The recruits exchanged confused glances. The dynamic had shifted, and they couldn't understand why. Why was their hard-ass instructor suddenly looking like he'd seen a ghost? Private Morrison, emboldened by the group dynamic and not smart enough to read the room, called out, "Yo, Sergeant Webb, you gonna let her play soldier with us? This ain't a daycare." Several soldiers laughed. Sarah's expression didn't change. She simply returned her attention to her rifle, performing a functions check with the kind of muscle memory that suggested she could do it blindfolded. Webb spun around, his face now flushed with genuine anger. "Private Morrison, did I give you permission to speak?" "No, Sergeant, but then shut your mouth before I have you running laps until you vomit up your breakfast and your stupidity." The formation went silent. Webb turned back to Sarah, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like respect tinged with embarrassment. "Ma'am, I apologize. I wasn't informed you'd be joining us." The roster I received didn't include. "It's fine, Sergeant," Sarah interrupted gently. "It was a last-minute decision. Colonel Matthews asked me to observe and provide some practical instruction if needed." "Colonel Matthews," Webb repeated, and the recruits didn't miss the way his spine straightened at the name. Colonel Bradley Matthews was a commanding officer of a Special Operations Training Battalion. You didn't question his decisions unless you enjoyed reassignment to the most miserable duty stations the Army could find. Specialist Torres leaned toward Morrison, whispering, "Dude, who is she?" Morrison shrugged, but his earlier confidence had evaporated. Something was wrong. You didn't see instructors like Webb back down unless there was a very good reason. Webb addressed the formation again, his voice carrying a new tension. "Gentlemen, we have a guest instructor joining us today. Staff Sergeant Chin will be observing your qualifications and may provide additional instruction as needed." "Guest instructor?" Morrison couldn't help himself, the words slipping out before his brain could stop them. "Sergeant, with all due respect, what's she gonna teach us? How to shoot at paper targets from 100 meters. The other recruits shifted uncomfortably. Even they knew Morrison had just crossed a line, but the question hung in the air, voicing what many of them were thinking. What could this tiny woman possibly teach them about being snipers? Sarah finally looked up from her rifle, her dark eyes moving across the formation until they settled on Morrison. When she spoke, her voice remained calm, almost gentle, which somehow made her words cut deeper. "Private Morrison, is it?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, adding the courtesy title too late and with obvious reluctance. "Tell me, Private, what's the longest confirmed kill shot in your career?" Morrison puffed up slightly. 450 meters, ma'am. Iron sights. During deployment in Kandahar." "That's impressive," Sarah acknowledged, and she seemed to mean it. "Good shooting. Now, Sergeant Webb, what's your record?" Webb's jaw tightened. 873 meters, ma'am. Confirmed kill on a high-value target in Fallujah, 2007. Murmurs of respect rippled through the formation. 800 meters was elite-level shooting, the kind of distance that required not just skill, but an intimate understanding of ballistics, wind reading, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, then returned her attention to Morrison. "Private, do you know what the current record is for the longest confirmed kill shot by an active-duty U.S. Army sniper?" Morrison hesitated. He'd heard stories, legends really, about incredible shots taken in Iraq and Afghanistan. Distances that seemed impossible. But specifics? He had no idea. "No, ma'am." 2,815 meters, Sarah said quietly. "That's 1.74 miles. The shot was taken in the Helmand province of Afghanistan, engaging a Taliban commander who was coordinating attacks on a Marine convoy. The wind was gusting at 23 miles per hour. The temperature was 112 degrees Fahrenheit, and the target was partially concealed behind a mud brick wall. The bullet took 6 seconds to reach its target, And during that time, the shooter had to account for the Earth's rotation. The range had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, waiting for what came next. The shot was witnessed by a Marine Force recon unit, confirmed by drone footage, and personally verified by a 2-star general. Sarah continued, her voice never rising above conversational volume. It broke the previous record by almost 300 meters and remains the longest confirmed kill shot in U.S. military history. She paused, letting the information sink in, before adding almost casually, I took that shot 4 years ago, called sign Ghost. The silence that followed was absolute. 30 young soldiers stood frozen, their earlier arrogance evaporating like water on hot steel. Several faces had gone pale. Morrison looked like he might be sick. Sergeant Webb closed his eyes briefly, looking like a man who had just realized he'd insulted a Medal of Honor recipient. Ma'am, I had no idea. The roster just said Chun. There was no mention of, it's fine, Sergeant, Sarah repeated, her tone gentle. Operational security. My full service record is classified above your clearance level. Colonel Matthews wanted me to remain anonymous for the first day. See how the recruits responded to having a female instructor before they knew my background. She looked back at the formation, and several soldiers unconsciously took a step back from the intensity in her gaze. Gentlemen, I understand your skepticism. The sniper community has been predominantly male since its inception. That's changing, but slowly. I'm not here to give you a lecture about gender equality or to make you feel bad about your preconceptions. She picked up her rifle, the M110 settling into her hands like it was part of her body. I'm here to teach you how to kill enemy combatants at distances they think put them beyond reach. I'm here to show you techniques that will keep you alive when the enemy has you zeroed in and you need to relocate without being seen. And I'm here to explain what it feels like to take a human life from a distance, so great you can't hear the impact, only see it through your scope. The weight of her words settled over the range like morning frost. This wasn't bravado or chest thumping. This was the simple, terrifying truth from someone who had lived it. Now, Sarah continued, moving toward the firing line. Let's see what you can do. Standard qualification. 300 meters. 5 rounds. Human silhouette target. Sergeant Webb will call you up one at a time. Show me what makes you think you belong here. For the next 2 hours, the recruits took turns on the firing line. Most performed adequately, some exceptionally. Morrison, despite his earlier arrogance, actually proved to be one of the better shots, putting 4 rounds in the kill zone and 1 just outside. He wouldn't meet Sarah's eyes as he cleared his weapon and stepped back on the line. Sarah watched each shooter with complete attention, occasionally making notes in a small field book. She didn't offer encouragement or criticism, just observation. But the recruits could feel her eyes on them, weighing every movement, every adjustment, every breath between shots. When the last recruit had finished, Sergeant Webb called them back into formation. The sun was higher now, the heat becoming oppressive. Sweat stained every uniform. But nobody dared complain or show weakness in front of the woman who had so thoroughly demolished their assumptions. Gentlemen, Webb announced, your performance was adequate. Some of you show promise. Most of you need serious work. Staff Sergeant Chin will now demonstrate the standard we expect you to reach by graduation. Sarah moved to the firing line, her rifle already loaded. She didn't rush, didn't show off. She simply settled into position with the kind of natural comfort that comes from thousands of hours of practice. Her breathing slowed, her body becoming absolutely still despite the heat. 300 meters, she called out, her voice carrying clearly. 5 rounds, rapid fire. Rapid fire at 300 meters was difficult. Most snipers prefer to take their time, letting their heart rate settle between shots. Rapid fire meant trusting your fundamentals, your muscle memory, your ability to manage recoil and reacquire the target without thinking that Sarah's first shot cracked across a range. Before the echo had faded, the second round was already downrange. 5 shots in under 6 seconds, each one placed with surgical precision. Spotters call it. Webb ordered. The soldier on the spotting scope had gone pale. All 5 rounds, dead center mass, Sergeant. Group size approximately 2 inches. 2 inches at 300 meters. That was shooting most recruits would struggle to achieve from a bench rest with all the time in the world. Sarah had done it standing, rapid fire, like she was punching holes in paper at 25 meters. "Now," Sarah said, ejecting the magazine and clearing her weapon, "let me show you something that will save your life downrange." For the next 4 hours, Sarah Chun taught, not with arrogance or condescension, but with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted these young soldiers to survive their deployments. She demonstrated techniques for reading mirage patterns that indicated wind shifts. She explained how to use the natural rhythm of your heartbeat to time your shots. She showed them how to build hide positions that could fool thermal imaging. But more than technique, she taught them psychology of sniping, the patience required to lie motionless for hours waiting for a shot. The discipline needed to pass on a good shot, because a great shot might present itself. The moral weight of taking a life from a distance, where you could see their face through your scope, but they never saw yours. "Sniping isn't about being the best shot," she told them during a break, her voice carrying to the exhausted recruits sitting in the shade. "Any of you can learn to hit a target at distance with enough practice, but being a sniper means carrying the burden of your kills in a way that other soldiers don't. An infantryman in a firefight pulls the trigger in the chaos of combat. He might not even know if his rounds hit anyone. But you'll see their face. You'll watch them fall. You'll count the seconds it takes for their friends to realize they're dead." She paused, and for the first time, the recruit saw something other than calm competence in her expression. Something that looked like old pain, carefully controlled but never fully buried. "My 89 confirmed kills? I remember everyone. Their faces, their locations, the weather conditions, what they were doing the second before I pulled the trigger. That's the price of being a sniper. That's what you're volunteering for when you raise your hand for this school." The honesty was brutal and necessary. Several recruits looked shaken, forced to confront the reality that they might not be ready for the psychological way of profession they'd sought out as the sun began to set, and Sergeant Webb called an end to the day's training. Private Morrison approached Sarah hesitantly. His earlier swagger was completely gone, replaced by genuine remorse. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. What I said this morning was completely out of line and disrespectful." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Private, do you know why I didn't correct you immediately?" Morrison shook his head. "Because your skepticism was honest. You looked at me and saw someone who didn't fit your image of what a sniper should be. That's not entirely your fault. The military has spent a long time creating an image of warriors as large, aggressive men. What I needed to show you, to show all of you, was that effectiveness comes in many forms." She shouldered her rifle case. "You're a good shot, Morrison. Your fundamentals are solid, and your instincts are sound. If you can match your skill with humility and your confidence with wisdom, you'll make an excellent sniper." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." As Sarah walked toward the parking area, Sergeant Webb caught up with her. "Ma'am, I want to apologize as well. I should have recognized your name immediately, and I should have shut down the disrespect the moment it started." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile the recruits had seen from her all day. "Sergeant Webb, this was exactly what Colonel Matthews and I hoped would happen. These young soldiers needed to confront their assumptions in a controlled environment before they deployed. Better they learn respect for unexpected warriors here than in a combat zone where those assumptions could get them killed." Webb shook his head in admiration. "That shot you described, the record breaker, I've read the after-action report. They said it was impossible, that the target was too far, the conditions too difficult, that no human could make that shot." "They were almost right," Sarah said quietly. "It took me 4 years of practice, 3 deployments worth of experience, and a level of focus I'm not sure I could replicate today. But the Marines needed that commander eliminated, and I was in position to do it. So I did." She paused at her vehicle, looking back at the range where 30 humble recruits were gathering their gear. "These kids have potential, Sergeant. Some of them will wash out. That's inevitable. But the ones who make it through, they'll be better snipers for having learned that their stereotypes don't define capability." As Sarah drove away from Fort Bragg that evening, She thought about the long road that had brought her to this moment, the countless hours on ranges, the deployments where she proved herself over and over, the injuries that still ached on cold mornings, and the 89 faces that visited her dreams. She never wanted to be a symbol or a barrier breaker. She just wanted to be the best sniper she could be, to protect the soldiers who couldn't protect themselves, and to eliminate threats before they could do harm. But somewhere along the way, she becomes something more, a teacher, a mentor, living proof that warriors came in all forms. The next morning, when Sarah returned to Range 7, she found 30 recruits standing at attention in perfect formation. They'd arrived an hour early and had already prepared the range for the day's training. In the center of the firing line, someone had placed a hand-painted sign that read, "Taught by the Ghost." Private Morrison stood at the front of the formation, his voice carrying clearly as she approached. "Staff Sergeant Chun, Sniper School Class 7 to 24, request your instruction, ma'am." Sarah smiled, recognizing the gesture for what it was. Respect, earned not through intimidation or rank, but through demonstrated excellence and patient teaching. "Then let's get to work," she said, setting down her rifle case. "Today, we're going to talk about shooting in urban environments. And I'm going to tell you about the time I had to take a shot through a 6-inch gap in a concrete wall at night during a sandstorm." The recruits leaned forward, eager now instead of skeptical, ready to learn from someone who had proven beyond any doubt that she belonged exactly where she stood. Because Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun, the Ghost of Kandahar, had taught them the most important lesson a warrior could learn. Never judge a soldier by their size, their gender, or your expectations. Judge them by their skill, their courage, and their commitment to the mission. And by those standards, she was among the greatest who had ever served.